Please note that questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. So if you'd like to minimize your GoToWebinar console during the presentation, just click the right-facing arrow key on the top left of the console. Clicking the left arrow key will return the console so that you can input your questions. Now I'd like to give you a brief overview of GSI. GSI is a full-service J.D. Edwards consulting organization. We're an Oracle Platinum partner that was founded in 2004 and now has over 100 employees. We have offices nationwide and are recognized on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies in the U.S. GSI specializes in project consulting, managed services, and cloud and hosting services, with them all backed with a 100% guarantee. GSI also provides a broad spectrum of business, functional, and technical consulting services for Oracle NetSuite, Oracle Cloud, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and other enterprise applications. In addition, we are a product development company that has many popular products. We have Genius, that's our advanced monitoring and performance analytics solution for J.D. Edwards or any business critical system on any platform. We also have Genesis, and that's our load stress testing application for system design, validation, or expansion for any J.D. Edwards or web-based critical system. G Shield is our comprehensive security solution for J.D. Edwards, including password reset and 2FA authentication. Rapid Reconciler, which allows you to effectively manage your inventory, in-transit, and R&B reconciliation processes for any version of E1 or World. And Rapid Approval is our Salesforce App Exchange solution that streamlines the approval request process. Okay, and now I'd like to turn things over to Bill for our main presentation and demonstration.
Alrighty, I'm going to change presenter here and going to show a screen. Find the right screen here. There we go. Can you hear me okay and see the screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Alrighty. Yep, that looks like me, so I've got the right presentation up. So welcome everybody. I want to just say up front that I'm going to be educating here a little bit about how to protect your data, and more than just ways that require backups. So let's go on to, that's the point of my discussion here. Prepare for disaster, more than just backups, more than just disaster recovery, high availability, mirroring, things like that. So when you think of a disaster, so as some of you, I know some of you have been in my other webcasts, and I've talked about disaster recovery before. I won't go into a whole lot of detail about it, but I will cover it a little bit. So, you know, when you think about a disaster, maybe it's a tornado or something like that. And recovering from that disaster is your plan to get the business back up and running after you lose your data for some reason. And usually when people are preparing for that, they're thinking that they're going to lose all of their data at once. And that's okay. I mean, there is a possibility of that happening. And so how do these people protect themselves? They do it through some kind of redundancy, backups, data mirroring, high availability, snapshots, or the cloud. So one of the first things here is that to protect yourself is to have just a simple backup. So if you have a disaster, you lose your data, you just restore from the backup. You can also mirror your database to another location using some method. Sorry, whoops, got a little ahead of myself there. And this shows log shipping, but you can do mirroring in many different ways using something like DataGuard on Oracle or availability groups in SQL Server, and that protects your data. And if you want to protect the actual software itself, you'll do something like high availability. This shows the Oracle rack, which is 2 instances pointing to a single set of data. That is that allows the database software to continue running. If the server dies, you still have access to your data. So you can see that if one of the rack nodes disconnects from the data, then everybody goes through the other rack node. And SQL Server works in a similar way, an active-passive configuration, while rack is active-active. You can also use a snapshot. I know a lot of clients use VMware snapshots or SimpliVity or something like that to take a full copy of everything that they have, put it on another server, and that way, should that main server die, they just flip over to another server which has all of that already set up on the other side. The only drawback to doing snapshots is that it's an external disaster recovery in that the database isn't controlling it. So if you have any transactions in flight or anything in memory or anything that hasn't been written to the database yet, a snapshot is not usually going to be able to capture that. So if you're looking for recovery times and recovery points to get to the very last transaction that came through, you may not get that through a snapshot. Now you can also do simple backups to the cloud. I have a whole other webcast about backing up to the cloud, and this is one of those screenshots where we did a backup to an Azure container. You can use the cloud simply as another hard drive. So if you connect it to SQL Server or Oracle, you set up a cloud container, and then you can, and for Azure specifically, you can actually make the container be a Windows hard drive. Now, if you're going to use AWS or go through Oracle, you might need to use a third-party tool. But really, all of these methods are to protect you against the loss of all of your data, and they can help you fix smaller parts of your data, but there's more than just the data itself and protecting that. What about data corruption or performance? Maybe there's a bug or some kind of hack, or you need a patch. Database versions change, and the edition that you're running makes a difference. And then your application may or may not be compatible with a future version of the database. And then you have a support contract that you have to maintain in order to get support. So there's a lot of scenarios where you could lose access to your data and it has nothing to do with your data. So let's take a look at some of those. First one is if your data file becomes inconsistent for some reason. Maybe somebody deletes the file, I guess. So you know that in the background of the databases, there's often multiple data files that hold parts of your data, and especially on Oracle. The way that's usually set up. If you lose a single data file, you could lose 25% of your data if that file is gone or is corrupt. And you can also lose part of your data if somebody accidentally deletes something. And I see a lot. The most common thing for people to delete is security records inside JD Edwards. You know, people will use an application, and it can be JD, it could be something else, and they'll run through something that they think they're testing, and all of a sudden all the data is gone, and the next thing you know, nobody can access the system. It's kind of the same as mistaken updates, but this is where you're using the application and somebody accidentally runs an update to maybe all of your sales orders or your shipping, and they mark all of these things as shipped that haven't been shipped. And then it updates a whole bunch of data in multiple tables. And now how do you get back from that? How do you fix that kind of a problem? There's not really a rewind button that you know of. And of course, it could just be somebody getting into your database that is making some manual changes to fix a mistake. I've seen people try to fix the previous, where they've run some kind of update wrong, and they have to go back in later to fix it with SQL, and then they mess up the SQL. And now they've got problems on top of problems all the way down. And you have to plan for that kind of thing because it happens more often than you think. And this takes a lot of time trying to fix these things, because when you have an update that covers multiple tables or multi-step transaction, these people who were working, now they have to spend their time trying to figure out what went wrong, how to fix it, and then they're fixing it instead of doing their normal job. One of the biggest things, I didn't put these slides in any particular order, but I'd have to say that performance issues are the biggest money loser for any company. You think about a disaster and you're down for 24 hours. Okay, that's great. But what if you had a performance issue that's been going on for years, and you didn't even know it. And maybe the system is working the way you think it should, but it's actually not performing very well because of various reasons. Maybe the configuration is not right, or you just have slow SQL or bad applications. You may not know. You may have just accepted that this is how your system performs, but the reality is that if you had someone come in and take a look at it, they would say, well, these settings should be like this one should be here, and all of a sudden you get 25% more performance out of it, and now your people work more efficiently, you get stuff out faster, reports run faster, and then people work faster just by changing a couple settings. And you know, and you may know about this. I mean, you could have people who are just accepting that this is how it's slow, but there also could be some people who they know it's slow, but they don't tell you it's slow. So that department, maybe this department over in a geographically separate location, is having slow performance, but they don't tell you. So you have all these people who are spending more time than they should doing their work because of something they're not saying. And these, some of these things you can't see in the logs. So it's kind of a human solution in those cases. Another performance thing is that maybe performance is reducing over time, and it's hard to notice. You know, maybe one day you think back, you know, a year ago this report finished by, you know, 2 a.m. or whatever. Now it's taking till 6 a.m. and it's pushing out all your overnight processes. And so what's happening what could be happening in the background is you have more and more data. Maybe it's taken a long time to get through that data. Your table statistics could be out of date. It could roll back to an improper database configuration. Network issues, maybe VMware. You know, as databases grow, you know, when you install a database right out of the box with all the normal settings, it may work okay at first. But as time goes by, it's not going to be able to adjust with your activities and make things work very well. So we actually had an issue with a larger client running on a supercluster, where the people who installed the superclusters configured the database to with some settings that seemed like they would be appropriate. I won't go into all the details, but they thought it was going to work for it. But what the problem was is these settings were hidden, and they changed how the database operated fundamentally, but not enough to make it to where everything was terrible, just a few things. So as we were troubleshooting, trying to figure this out, we found that it was a difference between how iSeries handles data and how Oracle handles data. In iSeries, they have the concept of SQL packages, which kind of makes things run a lot faster. It's equivalent to, I guess, Exadata's storage indexes. But if you don't take statistics on Oracle tables, then you obviously, if your statistics are out of date, those queries are going to run slowly on those tables. But if you change a setting inside the database, it can make the SQL statements running on those tables with out-of-date statistics. It can make those SQL statements run slightly faster, but not as fast as if you had updated the statistics. So what we had seen was the people who installed it had not gathered any statistics on the tables. In fact, they turned that off, the automatic stats gathering, and then changed the database, how the database got its data, buying a small performance improvement over what they had before, but not really addressing the main problem, which was they weren't updating statistics. So these performance issues plagued this client for a couple of years before we figured out that that they had changed hidden settings and changed the behavior of the database. So they had 2 years of slowness, of times that they were spending a lot more effort. Who knows how much money that cost them, but they don't really quantify that. However, it's still a huge, it's a disaster when you add up all the money that they could have saved by having a smoothly performing database. Another big thing that can actually cause immediate problems is if there's some kind of bug or somebody hacks your stuff. And hacks don't have to come from the outside; they can come from inside the company. Uh, but specifically with bugs, if you're going along, you find out that when you enter a certain 17-digit number, it causes things to calculate incorrectly, or you decide you're going to do some kind of export and it messes things up, or maybe there's a bug where a certain character, like a special character or a space in the wrong place, causes you to lose data, and you didn't know about that in advance. That not only do you lose the data, but you also have to fix the bug. And this normally requires opening a ticket to find the patch, or maybe realizing that you haven't patched it in a while, which is actually on the next slide. But unpatched vulnerabilities can cause people can create a situation where somebody can get into your system and steal your data, or even delete it, or cause a huge problem. We have another client who actually got hacked because they weren't patched. It's actually an interesting story, but which I'll tell on the next slide because it's a little bit more appropriate for the next slide. But if you have an unpatched vulnerability that exposes your data and somebody deletes the data or causes a problem, then all of a sudden you're down. And not only do you have to restore your data and fix that, you have to figure out what did you lose and now what secrets are out there, corporate secrets and things like that. And even when you do patch, maybe the patch breaks something, or whatever bug fix or whatever you're doing, it breaks something else, and now you have to fix that and patch that and have that downtime, which, when you're patching or putting in any kind of hot fixes, you want to do that in the non-prod area first. So, whenever you're doing a patch plan, which I have a slide later about that, you want to make sure that you're doing it in a way that doesn't create even more problems for you. So let's talk more about patching. Patching is kind of a big deal. Patching doesn't just patch problems. It doesn't just give you more features. It actually protects you against attacks like ransomware. In 2017, ransomware detections were up 90% over the previous year. Just this year, Oracle and Microsoft both released high priority critical patches in July. And only 37% of companies patch within a 3-month cycle. So it's likely that wherever you're at, you're not patched to July. And 28% of companies take a year or more to patch, or have never applied a patch, and maybe don't even know how long it takes to patch. And at some companies, unplanned downtime costs up to $17,000 a minute. And you can figure your own downtime cost yourself, as just kind of do a back of the napkin calculation of how much money does your revenue your company generate. You can kind of divide that by the employees. I know there's a lot more calculations in there about different salaries and whatnot, but if your company depends on a software that has a database associated with it, and that software goes away, then while the software is inaccessible, nobody's doing anything. So the money that would have been generated during that downtime has to be made up somewhere else. So you can kind of figure that maybe it costs $100,000 an hour to be down, or maybe it's only $10,000 an hour. And I don't think people really put numbers to that time, because if they did, we'd have a lot more people who are patching and keeping up with disaster recovery. So are you protected? I mentioned that Oracle and Microsoft both have put out some super duper critical patches that allow attackers to expose the data inside their system. So hopefully you have that on there. And the patching and hacking and stuff doesn't have to be on purpose. Somebody could accidentally get into your system without you knowing it, due to some kind of unpatched vulnerability, somebody internal. So do you review these patches? I mean, let's talk about a patching strategy next. You want to patch regularly. Obviously, the only good patch plan is a regular patching plan. I know some companies only patch once a year. Some will put the patch on as soon as it comes out. What you choose to do is up to your business, but I recommend you always err on the side of caution. don't skip a patch just because it's not in cycle for the business. Look at each patch and evaluate them and decide if they need to be put in. So, but don't be reactive. Have a plan to put patches in. Assign ownership of the patching plan to a person whose job it is to review this. Have a regular patching window, and then stay committed. You want to make sure that you always keep that in mind. Do a quarterly analysis of your software, whether you patch it or not, so you at least know where you're at. And then prioritize the patches. As I said earlier, you don't want to patch unless you absolutely have to. You can uninstall or disable components you don't use if they're coming up in a patch. Like, for example, one of the big patches for the Oracle database was related to the internal database JVM. Now, a lot of companies don't use that JVM, and that is the vulnerability, is that somebody could use that to get to your data. Well, if you just turn off and uninstall that JVM, then you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to apply the patch. So that's a good workaround, and maybe there's workarounds for patches rather than applying them. So you want to spend time to look at it and see what the actual vulnerability is, and maybe there's an easier way to get around it. And testing, obviously you need to test. You need to test to applying the patch to non-prod and test rolling it back, because, you know, the old saying, if it's not tested, it doesn't work. So if you don't test it, whoops, dang it, sorry. If you don't test it, then you're setting yourself up for failure usually. No matter how simple the instructions look, you still need to try it. Another important thing to look at on disaster recovery is that if you have a disaster, it matters what database edition you're on, what version are you using. You know, databases aren't supported forever. The oldest supported databases have additional support fees, right? So depending on what version of the database you're on, you may not be getting patches at all. And after the end of the life of the software, you might not get any security patches either. So, you know, even a technically supported database might not get a fix if that problem doesn't exist in a later version. So, you know, are you on SQL Server 2008? Then you probably are not getting any stuff, you know, not getting any support. You call it, you have a massive problem with your database, you call in to get support, and they're like, well, I can't fix this because you're not on the right version. Step one is to get the latest version. So now your disaster has gone from, I just need to get some data back, to now nobody can support me because I'm on the wrong version, and it just doesn't work. You also want to make sure you're not using an evaluation edition. I know that sounds crazy, but we do have clients who insist that they use an evaluation edition. For, you know, it's only 180 days, but when you get to the end of that evaluation, suddenly the software stops working. You don't want to be caught in that. So then all of a sudden you're calling your support people saying, hey, can you get me on a licensed edition, or can you extend the evaluation edition? The answer is no, you cannot extend it. You would have to reinstall it. But and then licensing, of course. If you're not licensed correctly and you're depending on a feature you're not licensed for, then you call in to get that fixed, you're going to end up with a lot of money to have to pay before you can get supported, and the disaster just keeps adding on and adding on. So be careful what version you're on. Let's take a look at this next slide. I'll show you what I'm talking about as far as what's supported. You can see that if you're on SQL Server 2008 or 2008 R2, those are, you know, those are not technically supported anymore. I mean, the mainstream support ended a long time ago. They're now in extended support until next July. So anybody on those database versions, they need to move off of those. And this slide is made specifically for JD Edwards. So if you're using SQL Server 2017 for something else, that's fine, but the red is there just for JDE. Now you look at Oracle, they're a little crazy there. They've got 11.204 is still supported, but it's paid support, and 12.101 is not supported at all. 12.102 still supported. It's in extended support now until July 2021. So the only free supported database for JD Edwards is 12.201. And it's a little bit different on the cloud. I don't have a slide for this, but on the cloud, starting at the end of the year, the only supported database for cloud JD Edwards users is 12.201. So if somebody's thinking of going to the cloud or is planning to get up there, and they're not on 12.201, then they're not going to be able to not going to be able to go to the cloud. And that's important because 12.201 is not supported on all levels of JD Edwards, which I'll show you in a couple slides here. And 18C, which is essentially 12.202, is not yet certified, and as far as I know, will not be certified within the next 3 or 4 months. Now we're talking about JDE, and this really it means any kind of application compatibility. JD Edwards, for example, does not support every version of the database that you may be running it on. You may have, if you decide that you're going to go to a newer database version, you may have to upgrade your software. So for example, we have a client who's on tools release 9147, which means that they can't, they're also on a database version 12.101. Well, they want to go to 12.201, but they cannot because that's not supported until a later release. So they would have to upgrade to a new tools release in order to get the new database. And then you have to think about, you know, if you upgrade your application, for example, if I go from, say, JD Edwards tools release 9.1 and I want to go to 9.2, you would have to upgrade your database then because the database you may be on now may not be supported in 9.2. Now I know that the database versions, you know, JD Edwards doesn't use the database super intensely, so it honestly, you know, when you get bullet right down to it, it doesn't matter really what database version you're on, but it does matter when you're trying to get support. So you may be creating a future disaster by not paying attention to your software versions by saying, hey, we're just going to upgrade to blah, 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 and then you get halfway through it and realize, uh-oh, the software doesn't support this, and now here we are halfway through this upgrade, or maybe you even finished the upgrade, and you realize that things aren't working the way they should. And this actually happened to a client, that not a client of ours, database client, but it was one of our partners. They upgraded their database to a later version and did not check to see if the software supported it. And then as soon as they upgraded it, the software stopped working correctly. Obviously, that's very bad because you cannot downgrade an Oracle database. You have to export all the data and then reinstall the old version and then import it back. It's a little bit time consuming. Plus, obviously, third-party compatibility is an issue. You may find that your main applications, like if it's JD Edwards, will work just fine with that later version, and you get up there, but then you find out this legacy application that you've been using for 20 years only works on an unsupported database, which kind of puts you in a pickle there because the database version that this third-party thing works with now you can't have it because it doesn't work with the database that you're using for your JD Edwards, and now you have to have another database. You've got to put everything in a separate database, which, you know, that could be somewhat of a disaster because of this third-party object. If this third-party software is something critical, then you could have part of your lines of business down while you create this whole new infrastructure to support that older version. So basically, do all your work up front to prevent a future disaster from hitting you. So let's look here next at some of the JD Edwards support matrix here. Everything in green is what's supported. So obviously, if you look on the right side, 9.2.2 only supports a couple databases for SQL Server and Oracle. And if you look back at 9.1, if you're running tools release 9.1, you're actually technically supported on unsupported database versions. So while SQL Server 2008 is currently in extended support, you are still technically supported running JD Edwards all the way up to 9.1.5. And the same thing for 11.2.02. 11.2.02 and 11.2.03 are not supported at all. but you are allowed to run them on JD Edwards software. So when you're looking at what's supported and what's not, you need to look at every piece of software in your system to make sure that even though the JD Edwards compatibility says that yes, this will work, that does not mean you're going to get supported by the database vendor if something goes wrong. So a disaster waiting to happen. And I know that there are some clients who have these combinations of database and JD Edwards or any other application who don't realize that they're running on a product that's not being supported, and they're not making patches or bug fixes. And as an example, we had a client who was running a version of WebLogic that was the only version that would run on their tools release. It was the latest version, but unfortunately that version of WebLogic was not supported by Oracle, and it was not being patched. So then when a vulnerability patch came out for it, that patch did not show up and was not communicated to anybody at that company. So they didn't know that this vulnerability existed because that version was not being patched, but it was certified for that version of JD Edwards. In addition, in order to go to a certified version of WebLogic, they would have had to upgrade their tools release. So it wasn't like they could just upgrade to the next version of WebLogic. They would have to do an entire tools release and a WebLogic upgrade just to get on a certified version of that WebLogic. So unfortunately what happened to them is because they were not supported and patched, they actually got hacked and were by a Bitcoin mining hack, which wasn't too terrible. Thank goodness they didn't lose any data, but still it was a pain in the butt and a really big deal, and exposed the difference between what's supported by your application and what is actually supported by the vendor. Speaking of support contracts, we covered this a little bit. Contracts do cost money. You'd be surprised how many companies let their support contract lapse because their database is stable. And unfortunately for them, this means that when things go really wrong, they have very little chance of recovering their data. Without support, obviously there's no patching, and you can't call into the response line. And you might have support, but what stage is it in? If you're on the latest version, then you're doing good. But if your software could be technically supported, but you're in extended support. So let's say you're in paid extended support and you don't even know it. And I know there's a lot of clients like that who lapse into extended support, but they don't realize that it's actually paid. So the next time they call in to get supported, they're going to be like, the database vendors is going to say, you know what, you owe us $47,000 a month for this support, and you need to pay that first before we can do anything for you. Then when it moves on to super old, like sustaining support, you might not be able to get any patches. So no matter what the problem is, no matter how much money you're paying, they might simply not even bother fixing the thing that you're having a problem with. And then you're facing having to upgrade your database anyway. So a problem that pops up that might have taken an hour to fix now is going to take a week to fix because you don't have the correct version. Now, don't let a third-party support contract give you the warm and fuzzies, because no matter how good the third party is, it's really only going to be a supplement to Oracle support. Third parties are not going to be able to create patches or make the software magically work in all instances. Sometimes it takes the database vendor, their own developers, it takes them days or even weeks to fix things that pop up, and you're not going to be able to depend on a third-party person for that. And obviously, unsupported versions, you're kind of stuck there. You're going to have to upgrade. And so we had looked at, I had showed you this supported database thing. If you're on 11.202, that's unsupported. And it doesn't matter how much money you're paying for it, it's still not supported. If you're on 12.102 right now, you're in paid support until for a couple years. Are you paying for that support? When you call in for a problem on that database version, are you going to get helped, or are they going to say, pay us $100,000? For those of you in that situation, I highly recommend you consider upgrading to 12.201. And if you remember from the previous slides, if you upgrade to 12.201, you need to take a look at your applications and make sure that they can support that. So you can see how this can get really complicated as far as database support and get you into kind of a really difficult situation of not being able to get supported if you have a disaster. So what this can do is, I remember there was a bug in 12.1 where they had introduced a new feature called recover table, which allowed you to pull an individual table out of backup files. So we were depending on that to restore a table that they had messed up. Unfortunately, there was a bug in that process, in that version, and once we figured that out, they gave us a hot fix, and we got it fixed, and we were able to do it. But can you imagine if you didn't have support, or you didn't have it paid up, and they said, you know, I could give you this 3-line piece of code or this fix, but you got to pay us 100 grand in order to get it. So that would have turned into a major disaster if they couldn't get fixed. So really, do you have a plan for disaster recovery that includes all of those things that I talked about? I mentioned before that unplanned downtime costs up to $17,000 a minute. Did you know also that 90% of businesses without a disaster recovery plan will fail after a disaster? They'll go out of business. Everyone loses their job. About 33% of business who have a plan, their DR plan failed when they needed it. Maybe they didn't test it or whatever. And 12% of the companies who actually tried to recover data in a disaster, they couldn't get it back at all. So will your business survive a disaster? You know, most companies with DR plans don't give any thought to recovering some of the small mistakes, like I've mentioned, like patching and accidental deletions. So you need to kind of have that in your plan as well. And then the next thing is, have you documented and tested the plan? You know, if it's not documented, then you don't have a DR plan. And if it's not documented so that you could hand it to some random person in the company and they could execute it themselves, then you still don't really have a DR plan, because usually disasters happen when you're on vacation, or maybe the disaster happened, you know, after you got fired, or who knows what. But the bottom line is, if you don't have a plan that someone else could execute without a problem, then your disaster is going to become a double disaster. And of course, if you don't test the plan, then it just doesn't work. Writing it down doesn't matter if it's never been executed. And I hope that I've helped everyone understand that disaster recovery is not just to recover from total loss of the data. You know, backups are not high availability, and vice versa. You know, VMware snapshots can still lose data. You know, if you're not patched, you're not on the right version, you don't have the support, then you could end up creating a future disaster by not paying attention to how your system is configured right now, especially when it comes to things like performance. All right, Kate, that is it for me. I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Okay. All right. Okay, and just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can hit the left arrow on your console, and then there's a little questions panel, and we'll get to that in a couple minutes. Our webcast today is part of GSI's free ongoing educational webcast series on J.D. Edwards. Our upcoming webcasts are listed on the screen, and to view our most up-to-date schedule, please visit getgsi.com/webcast. And GSI will be at the Northeast Regional User Group in Foxborough, Massachusetts on November 8th. And GSI provides extensive free educational resources for the J.D. Edwards community, including our weekly educational webcasts, our monthly newsletter called the GSI Insider, our online resource center where you can access our on-demand webcasts, white papers, and more, and our on-site and virtual workshops. If you would like to sign up for our weekly email reminders for upcoming webcasts, our monthly newsletter, or to create an account to get access to our resource center, go to getgsi.com, then go to Platforms on the main menu, select J.D. Edwards, and then you can select the appropriate link on the left. And it looks like we only had one question, and Bill is actually one that I can answer, so you're off the hook. And it's asking if they will get the slides for this presentation, and the answer is yes, they are in the resource center that I just referenced. You can go on and create a profile if you don't have one, and you can get access there. If you have any follow-up questions, our information is on the screen, and I'll leave it up there so you can take it down if you need to. And with that, it looks like we are all done. And I thank you very much for joining, and have a great day.